Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Rune Words. So I haven't finished all my Rune Words. I was actually focusing on the set videos because of some other, interesting things that had happened. Like for instance, we got all the upgraded sets. PTR was live. I was afraid PTR was going to go down, so I wanted to make sure I got all the set videos done first. But we do have a couple more Rune Words that are going to be added to the list before we finish all of them. We have Venom, Chaos, Hand of Justice, and one other rune word. I can't remember the name of it. But not a huge number, just like it's 4. And we'll be finished with the rune word series as well. Now, this rune word is a very odd one. It doesn't seem to have a lot of good purpose. And if you found a very good purpose for this rune word, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say down in the comments. But as we go over this rune word, we'll talk about what it could potentially be good for and, who. So this is the rune word Venom. Venom is Tal Dol Mal, and it is level 49 because of the Mal rune that is present in the rune word. Venom is kind of an odd rune word, and I've never really particularly understood kind of like who it could be great on. So as we go over this, we'll kind of hypothesize, and we'll talk about it. So right off the bat, you see that it has Ignores Target's Defense. And Ignores Target's Defense is a very amazing ability that allows you to essentially ignore the attack rating calculations. And the attack rating calculations on a weapon are not the full part of the formula. So there are other parts to the formula as well. One part of the formula is the level of the monster that you're fighting, your level, and various other things. So, for instance, if you were to use this at level 49, and you were trying to shoot, say, a monster who was level 85, it'd be very difficult for you to hit them, despite the fact that attack rating is not part of the calculation anymore, because it's not always about attack rating. It also has other things involved. The other interesting thing about Ignores Target's Defense is that it doesn't work on bosses. So this is important to note because in general, when you're talking about Ignores Target's Defense, you do have to understand that it is going to help you versus every monster in the game except for the bosses. And when you come to those bosses, it doesn't work at all. So, just not the greatest ability for that reason. Because, obviously if you're farming things that are not bosses, then yeah, it's going to come in handy. But if you are, after all, farming bosses, like if you want to kill Diablo or Baal or Mephisto or whatever, you're going to need actual attack rating to hit them, which is, of course, not beneficial in a build like this where you're trying to ignore attack rating as a calculation. We also have 273 poison damage on this, which is a lot of poison damage, but not a lot for level 49. And I do feel like that could be bumped up quite a bit if they wanted it to be. I have noticed that across the board, pretty much, on pretty much every item that has existed in Diablo 2, they've just been so dainty with their poison damage, and I never really quite understood why they're so dainty with their poison damage. They're like, here's a level 70 set, it gives you 11 poison damage over 3 seconds, congratulations, and I'm like, what is that actually going to be good for? Ever? Like, what characters does that help out? And I don't know. I said there was some weird thing going on with poison damage when they developed this game, because I swear they just didn't like poison damage, or maybe they balanced the poison damage around one set of HP, and then they bumped up the HP but never bumped up the poison damage to match. Could very well be it. They also gave it 7% mana steal, which kind of means a lot. Because if you're any kind of character who's burning mana on a regular basis, it could definitely be useful to you. The issue is that because there's no physical damage increase on this bow, the mana steal is actually quite useless. 7% mana steal is a lot of mana steal if you were using something like a Wind Force or like a Grandfather Colossus Blade or something. But 7% is not a lot when you are using a no physical damage fast weapon. And this becomes a pretty big issue, because if you're relying on that mana steal with this weapon, it's not going to work out. They should have doubled or even tripled that mana steal on this particular bow. It should have been 14 or maybe even, I don't know, honestly, 28% might still not have been enough, because you're only talking about like a very bare minimum of damage, because no matter what you put this rune word in, and it goes in all weapons. By the way, you can put it in a claw. You can put it in a scepter. You could put it in a halberd. You could put it in whatever you wanted to put in. It literally works in every single weapon in the game. But whatever weapon you put it in is only going to have its base damage. That's the highest it's ever going to be, is the base damage, which is not great. Especially when you're considering that it has 7% mana steal, which is supposed to restore your mana, and it's not going to because, well, you just don't really have a lot of physical damage to begin with. Kind of reminds me of that staff, unique staff that has like 100% mana steal on it, but the staff only does like 5 damage. So 100% mana steal of 5 damage is literally like 5 mana if you hit. It also has Prevent Monster Heal, which kind of follows the same motif of poison damage. So you got poison damage, you got the ability to prevent the monsters from healing, which of course is very nice. That is going to prevent the monsters from regenerating. It actually functions for 20 minutes, believe it or not. The only monsters it does not work on is Ubers. So Uber Mephisto, Uber Bale, Uber Diablo, and Pandemonium Diablo. Those are the only ones that it does not work on. And it actually is really effective. We also have hit causes monster to flee 25%. I guess he wanted to be in my shirt. Hit causes monster to flee 25% is kind of following along with the motif here. And the motif is generally that, you want to obviously poison them, make them run away. You're guaranteeing your hit against them. You're preventing their regeneration. And in general, it really kind of makes sense in retrospect of what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to achieve a bow, which has the ability to guarantee your hit, usually because this bow is probably used for a character who's not going to have a lot of attack rating. And they're probably also not going to be using a skill. We'll talk about that later. Prevent Monster Heal prevents their regeneration, and then the poison acts against their health. The hit causes monster to flee, causes them to run away, so they're relatively useless in the fight while they are slowly melting away, from the poison. So they're dying slowly from the poison, and they're also running away from you, which makes them, it makes it kind of an interesting bow. You can also, like I said, put this in a claw. A claw might be a good choice for the venom. The venom could be interesting. However, the hit causes monster to flee with a claw is still going to be kind of meh. I could kind of see this for a Blade Fury Assassin if it wasn't for the fact that it had no damage. The main issue here is that it does have no damage, and Blade Fury Assassins do actually need damage. It also has level 13 Poison Explosion and level 13 Poison Nova and level 15 Poison Explosion charges. None of these are actually going to be very good to use. I'm not even going to go over the damage on these because it's going to be relatively low without synergies. If it was a percent chance on striking or a percent chance when struck, these could be very interesting. But the issue is that as charges, the damage on them is so low that you would have to spam them to get any real effect. And it's you know what? Let's go over it anyway because I want to show you how poor the damage is on these two abilities without synergies. So if we were to use the level 13 Poison Nova, we would be getting a total of 250 poison, essentially average. So 250 poison damage to multiple targets at level 49. It's not going to kill anything. It's not even going to really help against anything. We also have level 15 Poison Explosion, and Poison Explosion is a little better than Poison Nova, but level 15 Poison Explosion is still only about an average of 700 damage. Well, maybe about 750. Let's say about 750. But it's over a rather long period of time of 7.6 seconds. And again, it's only 27 charges, and Nova is only 13 charges. And you'd be using them all the time if you actually wanted to use them for damage. It's not going to be like a Corpse Explosion. See, a Corpse Explosion charge is actually pretty nice because it does a guaranteed amount of damage, hits multiple targets around it, and it's going to be very useful. Poison Explosion, it has a relatively small radius. Very, very small. Hardly hits anything, in fact. And Poison Nova, on the other hand, has a really large radius, but doesn't really do very much damage. And the other odd thing about this is that poison damage doesn't really stack very well. So if I'm hitting them for poison damage, and then I apply Poison Nova, only the highest poison damage is going to take effect. It doesn't stack the poison damage up together. So I don't get like a multiplicative poison damage going on, which is honestly how it should be. Like if I hit a monster for, you know, like 1,000 poison damage with a bow, and then I use an ability like Poison Nova that gives 250, it should just add the 250 to the 1,100. But it doesn't do that. It only takes the highest number poison damage and it goes with that, which is kind of silly. So who all could actually use this bow? Well, it would have to be a character that is not doing physical damage. Because if you're any kind of character that's doing physical damage, it's probably not going to be for you. So let's take a quick look at what characters could potentially utilize this Rune Word. A Venom Assassin might have a decent time with it, but unfortunately, because of the way that Venom works, it's going to reduce all the poison durations down to 0.4 seconds, which means that the hit causes monster to flee is going to be more of a hindrance than anything else. The ITD and the prevent monster heal, as well as the hit causes monster to flee, kind of makes it better for a bow, but I probably wouldn't use it on a Amazon. Sadly enough, I probably wouldn't. I mean, you could potentially use it on an elemental damage Amazon, like for instance, a freezing arrow Amazon, or perhaps a exploding arrow Amazon. But the issue with this is that it doesn't have any kind of physical damage, and the mana steal on it is going to be useless for those characters, which kind of leaves it in a odd situation where the only really two characters in the game that could probably get good use out of this bow are the Holy X Paladins, so Holy Fire, Holy Shock, and Holy Freeze, or specifically a Enchant Sorceress. The issue with this bow is that it doesn't have any physical damage, and it appeals to an elemental damage character. It appeals to a Holy Freeze Paladin. It appeals to a Holy Shock Paladin. It appeals to a Holy Fire Paladin. It appeals to a elemental damage sorceress, like an Enchant Sorceress. A character that is adding elemental damage to their attack, and because the damage on the bow is so low, you have to get damage from somewhere. And that damage inevitably ends up being an elemental damage source. I also considered perhaps a Necromancer, but the issue with the Necromancer is he really doesn't have anything to augment this. He doesn't have any abilities whatsoever to augment this bow. He's got no elemental damage that he could add to the bow. He could, obviously get a little bit of use out of the Poison Nova and the Poison Explosion because they will synergize with his native. But in that case, why not just use the native abilities? Why use the charges? And I don't know. I feel like ultimately Venom is one of those rune words that just doesn't really quite fit into any specific build, and it's probably not a rune word that I would waste a Mal rune on. I hate to be very judgmental about this particular rune word, but it just doesn't seem like a good rune word. It lacks the damage that it would need to be useful to a Blade Fury Assassin. It lacks any kind of life or mana steal. It doesn't have any plus to skills. It doesn't have any Crushing Blow. It doesn't have any Deadly Strike. It doesn't have any, like O skills, like any specific O skill that's being added. The poison damage isn't really high enough to be super useful, and quite honestly, I don't even really understand why it's a level 49 item. I feel like this item is balanced more toward a character of a lower level. The ignores target's defense, of course, doesn't work on bosses. The prevent monster heal doesn't work on Ubers, and unfortunately, because of the hit causes monster to flee, it makes a very poor melee weapon for a lot of characters. Overall, I think this might be one of the worst rune words that I've ever reviewed. Just simply because it tries very hard to accomplish a very specific goal, and it doesn't really quite accomplish it. Let's take the bow out though, and let's have some fun with it real quick. I'm gonna this is actually an Enchant Sorceress, by the way, and we're gonna use this on an Enchant Sorceress. So I have a offhand build to enchant myself with. I'm gonna swap back over to the bow, and as you can see, I have fairly nice damage with the enchant, and then we're gonna play around with the idea of this. Let me take the weapon off my Merc. As you can see, I mean, it kind of performs its function. The monsters get feared. They run away. I can apply my elemental damage with absolute ease because, of course, the ITD is making it so that my attacks will hit no matter what. Unfortunately, there's no other effect, though. One of the reasons why this doesn't really seem like a good combination to me is probably the simplest in the world, is that there are other items in the game. Let me go into town so I can talk without the horking pig noises. There are other items in the game that have skills on them. So I could be using a Widowmaker with Guided Arrow, which actually does hit Ubers, by the way. I could be using, and it has physical damage to boot. I could be using, for instance, a Ravenclaw or a Demon Machine or any other number of bows which would have other effects on them. Like, for instance, this fires explosive arrows or bolts. And so when you use a Demon Machine on an Enchant Sorceress, you get this amazing fires explosive arrows or bolts, and my elemental damage is multiplied. To give you kind of an idea what this does, let's take a look at it real quick. So let me go grab some bolts. And I'm going to kind of show you how the multiplicative damage is just missing. So if you guys are unaware, Exploding Arrow has an effect that it actually applies your damage a second time in the explosion. And you can do a pretty massive amount of damage this way just by simply firing your bow and piercing targets. Which is another thing that this one is missing. So Venom doesn't have Pierce on it either. So there's no Pierce, there's no special skill, there's no O skill, and I think just in general, it just doesn't really work toward the purpose which it seems to be designed. And I've gone on for 17 minutes on a rune word that you probably will never make. Let me do one more check real quick, because I want to make sure that there's nothing specifically that people have used this rune word for. The irony. So I did a quick search on Google, and basically, you know, just kind of like precursory, seeing if anyone had any idea of what you would use Venom for. And you know what I found? Literally, it was a post of like the worst rune words in the game, and Venom was voted #1. I mean, it really kind of is. I think it might actually be the worst rune word. And it's kind of fitting that at the end of all the rune word videos, I made this one. After I'd gone over all the other rune words and looked at all the other cool effects that these rune words have, and I look at Venom and I'm like, yeah, that sucks. It's actually pretty sucky. I can't even really think of, for the life of me, what it could potentially be good for. I mean, ITD doesn't work in PvP. I was almost even thinking like it could be like just a cheap ITD weapon that you could make. Because, of course, you know, to get ITD, you'd need like a jaw rune otherwise. And that doesn't even work in my head. And I'm literally scratching my head here trying to figure out anything that I could think of. I mean, a claw, I guess it could be kind of useful. But the issue here is that if you're using a claw, you're probably using melee. As a trap assassin, it's absolutely useless. As a Blade Fury assassin, it's absolutely useless. Maybe as an elemental damage martial arts assassin. It's the only thing I can think of. But even in that case, I probably still wouldn't make it. I think I'm going to end this video here. Tell me what you think about Venom Rune Word. I'm interested. I want to hear what you guys have to say. I could be horribly wrong. Tell me why I'm horribly wrong. I love to hear why I'm horribly wrong. Let's do it. As always, thank you for watching, and keep watching.